In today's episode, I'm sharing 10 true disturbing stories about being home alone on a cold November night. If you think being alone at night is peaceful, these stories might change your mind forever. But before we continue, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe and don't forget to like and share. Thank you all. Now, let's begin. My parents were out of town for a funeral. An uncle on my dad's side, someone I'd only met twice and didn't know well. The service was up in Pennsylvania, and they figured there was no point dragging me along for a 7-hour drive and a weekend of awkward condolences. So, I stayed back to look after the house. We lived right on the edge of a small ridge community called Carswell, down in southern West Virginia. Real quiet place. Our place sat right where the trees started thickening. Nearest neighbor? About a quarter-mile away, maybe more if you count the turns in the gravel. Anyway, it was mid-November, and the days had started dropping fast into cold. That night hit harder than I expected. I'd finished an early dinner, cleaned up the kitchen, and got a fire going in the stove. Then I heard the back door handle rattle. It wasn't a knock. It wasn't banging or pounding. Just the unmistakable rattle of the handle getting tested. A soft, steady jiggle, like someone was seeing if it would turn. I paused, my hand halfway to a chip bowl I'd left on the couch. That door's at the back of the house, completely out of sight from the main road. To get there, someone would have had to walk around the side yard, past the rusted-out tool shed, and through a heavy gate that I'd double-locked earlier that day. We had that set up to keep deer from wandering onto the porch and helping themselves to the firewood. I also knew very clearly that the back porch light wouldn't come on because I'd switched the breaker off 3 days before. It had been flickering randomly, probably from a bad sensor, and I hadn't gotten around to fixing it. So, yeah, the second I heard that handle move, my entire body just went still. I muted the TV and waited. Silence. I tried to brush it off. Wind maybe. Or a raccoon. We got a lot of those. But then it came again. Rattle. A pause. Then rattle, rattle. Not aggressive. More like someone trying to be gentle about it. Careful. Curious. It didn't feel random. I walked into the kitchen and grabbed the big metal flashlight we kept in the junk drawer. One of those heavy-duty kinds with the wide beam. It felt comforting in my hand, even though I knew it wasn't much of a weapon. I remembered, with a slight wave of irritation, that my dad had taken both our firearms, his hunting rifle and his old .38 revolver with him on the trip. Something about not wanting to leave them unattended, which made sense. But still, I switched on the inside porch light and stepped closer to the curtain. Nothing. I eased the curtain back just a bit to peek outside. Everything looked normal. Same old deck chairs. The bag of firewood I dropped off earlier was still leaning against the post. No movement, no shapes. Not even the breeze was moving anything. I waited there, flashlight ready, just staring. My heart was doing that slow thud in my ears, but I tried to breathe evenly. Nothing else happened. No more rattling, no more sounds. After a while, I figured maybe a raccoon had climbed the steps and messed with the door out of boredom. They're smart, and we've had a few try to open the trash bins before. So I let it go. Walked back to the den, sat down, tried to find where I left off in the episode. Then the front porch light came on. That one's motion activated. It doesn't go off unless someone's walking up the steps or standing directly in front of the door. It's sensitive enough to catch a dog or deer, but not leaves blowing or shadows moving. I stood up so fast I nearly tipped the coffee table. I crossed the room, went to the window, and looked out through the blinds. Nothing. The light was definitely on. The porch and the gravel driveway were bathed in this sterile yellow glow. But there was nobody there. No footsteps, no creaking wood, just silence, silence. I stared for a long time. It stayed on for about 30 seconds, then blinked off. And just as it did, 3 knocks. Not on the front door, on the window behind me, the one that faces the backyard. I didn't turn around right away. I think part of me wanted to believe I'd imagined it, but I knew I hadn't. I backed into the hallway. No lights, just the faint flicker from the wood stove and whatever moonlight leaked through the windows. I made my way upstairs, keeping to the edges of the floorboards to avoid the loud creaks. It felt important not to make noise. In my bedroom, I crouched low and moved the curtain an inch to look out. Something was standing at the edge of the woods. It was just far enough that I couldn't make out details, just a tall, narrow silhouette. Too slim for a bear, too still for a deer. No lantern, no flashlight, no glowing eyes, just this dark figure, planted like it belonged there, facing the house. I didn't feel like I was being watched. I knew I was being watched. And then I realized something worse. When I heard the knock on the downstairs window, there had been no footsteps, no crunch of frost, no disturbed grass. I looked down, scanning the area just below the glass, and saw nothing. Not a single mark, but there had been a knock, loud enough to make me turn. I let the curtain fall shut, locked the bedroom door, shoved the dresser against it. Then I sat on the floor with the flashlight across my lap and waited. Didn't sleep. Didn't even close my eyes. In the morning, I walked the house slowly, checking every door, every lock, all still secure. Then I stepped out onto the back porch. The firewood bag was gone, completely missing. I went around to the front yard, looking for tracks, trying to find anything that would explain what I'd seen or hadn't seen. Instead, I found 2 drag marks. Wide, parallel, cutting through the frost from the side gate all the way to the woodpile, like something heavy had been pulled. They stopped right at the base of the porch steps, and sitting on the top step, placed neatly, was a single piece of split hickory. No footprints, no scuffs. Just that one piece, laid out like a calling card. My parents came back 2 days later. I never told them. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding ridiculous, and nothing's ever happened since. I'd picked up this contract gig out in the hills near Lanes Ridge Small, tucked away place in the northern stretch of West Virginia. I was doing mapping work for a survey company, bouncing around rural counties and sleeping wherever the budget allowed. Hotels were out of the question. I needed something cheap, private, and far enough off the radar that I wouldn't have to deal with people or traffic. That's how I ended up in this cabin, about 8 miles from the nearest gas station and probably 40 from anything that resembled a town. It was buried off an old service road, barely marked, and surrounded by woods so thick you couldn't see more than 20 feet in. The cabin had clearly been patched up over the years by people who either didn't care or didn't know what they were doing. The door frame leaned, the windows were cloudy, and the floors bowed underfoot. Still, it had a wood stove, a roof that didn't leak, and, most importantly, a lockable door. It was mid-November when this happened. I remember because I'd just come back from Crossbend with a carload of groceries and firewood, rushing to beat the cold snap they said was coming. One of those sharp, early Appalachian freezes where everything suddenly feels brittle, like the air itself could crack. I brought everything inside, cranked up the wood stove, and made a batch of chili. I didn't have internet, and the signal was too weak for more than the occasional voicemail, so I kept the little battery radio on, just to break the silence. Static mostly, sometimes a preacher or a country station bleeding through. That night, it was quiet. Real quiet. No wind, no animals, just the occasional pop from the stove and that soft hum of static. I remember thinking how good it felt to be warm for once, curled up in that creaky old recliner with a blanket over my legs. I just started drifting when I heard the knock. 3 of them. Even, deliberate, and too heavy to be anything else. You can tell the difference when you've lived alone in the woods long enough. A branch scrapes or a tree creaks, sure, but this was a knock. I sat up, blinked a few times, and checked the time. 10:03. No one should have been there. I don't just mean that in a paranoid way. I hadn't told a soul where I was staying. Not coworkers, not family. It wasn't a safety thing. I just didn't feel like explaining why I'd chosen some lopsided shack in the middle of nowhere. Plus, I liked the quiet, so when I heard that knock, everything in me went still. I didn't breathe. I just sat there listening. Nothing else followed. No footsteps, no voice, no engine pulling away. Just the fire crackling and my pulse thudding in my ears. I finally stood up and went to the front door. The porch light hadn't worked since day one, so I used the side of the curtain, pulled it back just enough to peek out without drawing too much attention. Nobody was there. Just the porch steps, the gravel path, and black trees beyond. I leaned a little further, trying to catch movement. Anything but the woods swallowed it all. I waited. 5 minutes, maybe 10. Still nothing. Eventually, I locked the door, dragged a chair under the knob, and turned off the radio. The static felt too loud all of a sudden. I sat back in the recliner again, this time alert, ears tuned to every sound. And then came the second knock, this time from the back door. It was softer, more of a tap really, but that's what made it worse. You could write off a heavy knock as someone confused or drunk or even dangerous. But soft tapping? That's someone trying not to be noticed. Here's the thing. There was no easy way to the back of a cabin. It wasn't like there was a backyard. The ground dropped into a slope covered in rock, thick brush, and half-dead trees. I hadn't even walked back there. It wasn't accessible, and it definitely wasn't flat. So how did someone get back there? That's when the fear started to settle in. Not the adrenaline kind, something colder, something that made it hard to move. I didn't go to the back door. I didn't call out. I went straight to the fireplace, reached behind the wood rack, and pulled out the rifle. It wasn't loaded, but I kept rounds in the drawer near the sink. I loaded two and kept it in hand as I crossed to the kitchen. The back door had a narrow window near the top, one of those old frosted glass ones that don't let much light in or out. I leaned toward it, heart thudding in my throat, but it was pitch black outside. I couldn't see anything. I didn't dare turn the light on, so I stood there, still, waiting. Nothing moved, no more knocks. Not a whisper. I stayed like that for maybe 15 minutes before I backed slowly into the living room, still holding the rifle. My hands had gone clammy, but I don't think I even noticed until I felt my grip slipping on the wood. Upstairs in the loft, I had a better view of the front clearing. So I climbed up, keeping low, and peered out the upstairs window. That's when I saw them. At first, it didn't register. Just a shape at the edge of the trees, tall, narrow, completely still. No light, no motion, nothing to catch your eye unless you were really looking. But there they were, standing just past the gravel, not close, not far, maybe 30 yards out. I couldn't make out a face, just the faint outline of someone in a long coat or a blanket or something draped over their shoulders. They weren't moving, not waving, not stepping forward, just standing. I stared so long, my eyes started to burn. Then they did something I wasn't ready for. They stepped backward, just one step, slow, like they were melting into the woods behind them. And then they were gone. I didn't sleep at all. I sat with my back against the wall, rifle balanced across my knees, eyes flicking between the upstairs windows. I kept expecting another knock, another sound, but nothing came. Eventually, the sky started to lighten. I got up, still jittery, and checked outside. I walked the length of the porch, then around to the back. I expected to see prints. The ground was soft in places, dry in others, but not enough to hide a full set of footsteps. But there was nothing. No sign of anyone, no scuff marks, no broken twigs. It was like no one had been there at all. That messed with me more than anything. I packed up that same day, told the company I needed to be relocated. Found a furnished place near Corley, a town with neighbors, street lights, cell service. I just dropped the key in the metal mailbox out front and drove off. My husband Cole had picked up a temporary HVAC contract 3 hours south in a place called Jasper Hollow. It was the kind of job that came with decent pay but lousy hours. 6-day weeks, 10-hour shifts, and a little rental trailer shared with 2 other guys from the crew. He left early in the month, said he'd be back before Thanksgiving. I wasn't thrilled about staying alone, but we needed the money, so I told him I'd be fine. We were renting this little 2-bedroom house outside a quiet town called Meadow Ridge, way up in the Tennessee hills. It's not the end of the world exactly, but it sure feels like it after sundown. The road to our place is barely wide enough for 2 cars, and the house itself sits right at the edge of a dense patch of forest that locals just call the thicket. Not the most welcoming nickname. We weren't totally off-grid, but it sometimes felt like it. Cell service died about a mile before you hit our driveway, and the internet cut out if you sneezed too hard. Power outages were common, especially once the wind picked up. That night, the wind hadn't just picked up. It had been barreling through the trees like it had somewhere to be. I spent most of the afternoon listening to branches scrape the roof and wondering how old the wiring was. By the time it got dark, I'd finished a bowl of leftover stew and dumped the dishes in the sink. I had one of those reality TV shows playing in the background while I folded laundry in the living room. Just socks and pajamas and a hoodie I'd washed 3 times trying to get the campfire smell out of. Pretty uneventful. Then the porch light flickered. Once, twice, and blinked out completely. Like I said, not surprising. It happens a lot during storms, or even when the power grid just gets bored, I guess. I was about to go grab a flashlight when I heard a knock at the front door. 3 sharp taps. Not on the screen door, the thick wooden one, the one that locks from the inside. I just froze, didn't move a muscle. There's no reason for anyone to be knocking on our door at night. We don't have neighbors you could stroll over from. You'd have to drive, and there was no sound of a car, just wind. Then came a second knock, slower, with a pause between each tap, like whoever was out there wanted me to know they weren't in a hurry. I didn't answer. I didn't even blink, just sat there holding a pair of mismatched socks. Then I heard it, footsteps. Heavy ones, shifting on the wooden porch planks. I know that sound because it always makes the railing rattle a little. This wasn't just someone standing there. They were pacing. 2 steps. Stop. 2 more. Stop. Not in a nervous way. It sounded methodical, like they were measuring the length of the porch or waiting for something. I snapped off the lamp and crept toward the hallway, staying close to the wall so whoever it was wouldn't see movement through the front window. There's this narrow slit between the curtain and the sill. I peeked through it, holding my breath. I couldn't see anyone. Just the outline of the porch swing moving slightly in the wind and the edge of the banister. No shadow, no shape. But the footsteps kept going, just back and forth, 2 steps. Pause. Again. Then silence. Not like they left, just like they stopped moving. I waited there in the dark, counting backward from 50 in my head, then forward again, still nothing. I finally tiptoed to the kitchen and reached above the fridge for the old .38 revolver we keep up there. It's been unloaded since we moved in. I don't even think Cole knows where the bullets are, but I took it down anyway. It was cold and heavier than I remembered. Just holding it made my hand stop shaking so much. I went back to the hallway and double-checked the front door. Lock was still latched, deadbolt turned tight. No signs of anything disturbed. I figured maybe it was just some hunter who got turned around, or maybe even one of those survey guys who check property lines. Still weird, but not completely crazy. Then I heard a different sound. It came from the side of the house this time. Not footsteps, something lower to the ground. A dragging sound, slow and rough, like someone was pulling a tarp across gravel or leaves. It scraped right beneath the kitchen window. I ducked down behind the fridge, crouched low with the revolver across my knees. The dragging lasted maybe 10-15 seconds, then stopped so suddenly it made my ears ring. I waited again, 10 minutes, maybe more. My knees were numb. The kitchen clock had stopped ticking at some point. I hadn't even noticed. It was so quiet you could have heard my breathing from across the room. Eventually, I convinced myself it could have been a deer, or a raccoon dragging off trash. I was almost ready to stand when I heard something else. A short, metallic click. It came from the back of the house. Not inside, but close. There's only one thing back there that makes that sound. The latch on our garden gate. It's an old spring-loaded hook you have to lift just right to open. I always shut it when I take the trash out, and I remember locking it earlier that afternoon. It was unmistakable. One click. Then nothing. We don't have a porch on that side, just a concrete slab and a mudroom door we never use. The security light's been busted since the week we moved in. I slid along the floor into the mudroom, pressed my ear to the thin wall, and I heard it breathing. Not loud or ragged, just breathing. Calm, steady, like someone was standing just on the other side of the door, maybe leaning against it. I held my breath to make sure I wasn't just hearing my own. Then it stopped. And that was almost worse. I didn't look out the window, didn't touch the curtain. I just backed up, inch by inch, until I reached the hallway. Then I opened the closet door, slid inside, and curled into the corner between the coats and the vacuum cleaner, gun still in my hands, elbows resting on my knees. I sat like that for the rest of the night. I didn't sleep. I didn't even move much. The only thing I remember was the sound of the wind dying down sometime around 4, when light finally started creeping in through the windows. I got up. My whole body ached like I'd been hit by a truck. I checked the doors, front and back both still locked, everything in place. I walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the yard. The gate was wide open. The frost had settled overnight, and across the lawn were 2 long, straight drag marks starting from deep in the trees and ending right at the back step. No footprints, no tire tracks, just 2 parallel lines like something had been pulled straight across the yard. I stood there for a while, staring. My breath fogged the glass. That afternoon, I drove into town and used the payphone at the gas station to call Cole. Told him I wasn't staying there another night alone. He didn't question it. Just said he'd be home in 2 days and asked if I could go stay with someone. I called my cousin Rena, who lives over in Whitestone, packed a bag, locked the doors, and left before sunset. It was a Friday night, late November, and my grandparents were headed out to visit friends in Harlan for the weekend. Nothing unusual about that. They did it every year after Thanksgiving, left early Friday morning, and didn't come back until sometime Sunday afternoon. They lived, I guess, way out in a place called Ridley Hollow. The nearest gas station is about 20 minutes away, and that's only if the roads are clear. Their house is a single-story ranch, long, low, and old enough that the floorboards still groan when you walk too hard. They left around 10 that morning. By 2, the first snowflakes were already starting to fall. There was a fire going in the wood stove, enough food to last days, and their old dog Grits still hanging around to keep me company. Grits was maybe 13. Big, shaggy, a mix of something like retriever and something else nobody could figure out. He moved slow, had cloudy eyes, and didn't respond too well unless you got real close and raised your voice. Still, he always knew when something wasn't right. I trusted his instincts more than most people's. I spent most of the afternoon chopping kindling and restocking the indoor wood box. Got the fire going nice and strong before dinner and made myself some canned chili on the stovetop. Nothing fancy, but it hit the spot. Around 9, I popped in one of my granddad's old VHS tapes, some grainy monster flick with bad dubbing, and settled in on their sagging couch with a blanket over my legs and Grits snoring by the hearth. And then he stopped snoring. Not all at once, but gradually. I didn't even notice until the low growl started. Not a bark, not a whine, just this slow, steady vibration from deep in his chest. I looked over, and he was standing stiff, facing the hallway that led to the mudroom, ears flat, eyes fixed. That hallway didn't have a door, just an open frame, and I couldn't see much beyond the first few feet. It was dark back there. I muted the TV. Everything went quiet, except for the occasional creak of the roof and the fire popping behind me. I called to Grits. Nothing. He didn't even twitch his tail, just stared, growled. I figured maybe a deer or something had wandered close. Happens sometimes. I grabbed the flashlight from the counter and walked toward the back door. It was locked, same as I'd left it. I checked the little window over the washer. No footprints in the snow. No movement. Still, that growl kept going. I knelt next to Grits and scratched behind his ears. His muscles were tight, coiled, like he was ready to lunge if he had the strength. I told him to calm down, got him to take a treat, and after a few minutes, he settled back near the fire. I went back to the couch, but my focus was shot. Maybe 25 minutes later, it started again. Same growl, same direction, only this time it was lower, deeper. I didn't even pretend to ignore it. I walked the entire perimeter of the house, every door, every window, checked twice. Everything was locked up. I opened the back door again, shined the flashlight around, saw nothing but white. Still, the feeling was there, like someone had been near, like something was near. I closed the door, shoved the chair under the knob again, and even dragged the old dresser from the guest room in front of it, just for good measure. It was an overreaction, maybe. But something about Grits made me uneasy. He wasn't just reacting, he was warning. By 11, I decided I needed to sleep, even if it meant locking myself in the bedroom with a baseball bat under the bed. Grits followed me halfway down the hall and stopped. Just stopped. Turned and laid down right in the middle of the hallway, like he wanted to keep eyes on both ends of the house. I didn't argue, just left the door cracked for him and crawled under the covers. The fire had burned down by then, and the warmth was fading. I don't know how long I was asleep. Long enough for the room to get cold, not just chilly cold. I could see my breath in the dark. My fingers were stiff, and my nose felt numb. The first thing I noticed, though, wasn't the cold. It was the silence. Real silence. Grits wasn't pacing. He wasn't breathing. I didn't hear his nails on the floor, didn't hear the occasional snort or shuffle. I got up, pulled on my hoodie, and crept to the door. The hallway was black. No nightlight, no glow from the stove, just dark. I whispered his name, once, twice, nothing. Then I noticed this weird glow coming from the kitchen, not firelight, not a lamp, just this faint bluish shimmer, like the reflection off an old TV screen. I moved slow. My socks barely made a sound on the floor, but the wood creaked anyway. When I turned the corner into the kitchen, I stopped dead. The front door was wide open. Snow had drifted in all the way to the rug. The porch light was on, but it didn't help. Everything looked drained, washed out, like the color had been sucked out of the world. Just outside the threshold were two sets of footprints in the snow. One set deep and wide, the other smaller. Bare feet, not walking up to the house. Walking out of the woods. My chest went tight. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I just stood there, staring at them, waiting for something to explain it. And then I heard it. Inside, a slow creak, floorboards settling. Not from the front door, from the laundry room. I turned around fast. The back door was still locked. Chair still wedged tight. No windows were broken. No other doors open. But someone was in the house. I started backing up. I don't remember making the decision. I just moved. Hands shaking, eyes darting. My phone was dead and useless. Even if it wasn't, we had no signal this far out. The landline hadn't worked since spring storms. I ran for the gun cabinet, but it was locked tight. Key nowhere in sight. My granddad kept it in his glove box. Figures. So I grabbed the fire poker instead. Heavy. Iron. Solid enough to hurt someone if it came to that. I whispered for Grits again. Still nothing. Then I saw him, on the floor near the kitchen, curled on his side. His body looked still, too still. I wanted to run to him, check if he was breathing, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Something about the way he lay there, it felt final. Then I heard the whispering, not words, just this light clicking noise, fast, like something with nails scraping over old wood. It came from the bathroom. I backed away, slow. A shadow shifted behind the cracked bathroom door, tall, narrow. That was it. I ran barefoot, out into the snow. Cold ripped through me, up my legs, into my spine. I didn't care. I ran to the tree line, crouched behind the first thick pine I could find, and stayed there, shivering, eyes on the house. I watched, waited. Nothing came out. After maybe 10 minutes, I circled around the edge of the woods and made it to the neighbor's old tool shed. They'd moved years ago, but the shed was still there, barely standing, roof sagging, but with a latch and a half-moldy blanket inside. I wrapped myself in it and sat with a rusted shovel in my lap, too cold to think straight. I stayed there until the sky turned gray. The sheriff came out that afternoon, walked through the house, took notes, said the door must have blown open, said Grits died of old age, said there were no signs of a break-in, but they saw the prints. the bare feet, the boots. They didn't have anything to say about those. The cabin was small, about 15 minutes outside a town called Calmer's Hill, a place that had more churches than it had grocery stores, and where the gas station doubled as the local diner if you didn't mind your burger tasting faintly like motor oil. I moved there that spring, mostly just to get away. From what exactly, I didn't even know anymore. It was peaceful in a way I didn't even realize I'd missed. The cabin had been empty for a while before I bought it, but it was solid. Couple of creaks in the floorboards, sure, and the kitchen sink always had this tiny leak that came back no matter how many times I fixed it, but it felt like mine. I could park the truck out front and leave the keys on the seat overnight. No one ever came close. That night, it was maybe the second week of November. I was there alone. The temperature had dropped quick after the sun went down. One of those nights where you could hear the cold settling into the wood, little sharp pops from the trees outside, like they were cracking their knuckles. Rex, my dog, was asleep next to the stove, and I was halfway watching some old VHS tape I'd found at a flea market. A bad action movie I'd seen a dozen times. I wasn't really watching it, more just letting the noise fill the room. Around 10, I got up to grab more firewood. The stack was about 20, maybe 25 feet from the porch, right where the yard sloped into the woods. I didn't bother grabbing a flashlight. There was enough moonlight to see, and I'd done the trip so many times I could probably walk it with my eyes closed. I had just turned back toward the cabin, arms full of wood, when I heard it. At first, I thought it was an animal. Something quick and sharp like a cry, but short, almost like someone catching their breath after choking on something. It came from the trees, just past the woodpile. It sounded like a kid. I froze right there. My back tightened like it was bracing for something, and I listened hard. It hadn't been loud, but it cut through everything. Through the frost, the wind, even the crackling sound my boots made when I shifted weight. I've heard foxes before. Their screams can rattle you if you're not ready for them, but this wasn't high-pitched like that. It wasn't drawn out, it was clipped. Low, wet-sounding, like it came from a throat clogged with tears. For a second, I just stood there, every instinct telling me to move, to get back inside, but my legs held still on their own. 10 seconds passed, maybe more, but nothing followed it. No wrestling, no breath, no second cry. I turned and walked back inside. Didn't run, didn't slam the door, just walked in calm and steady, because something in me said whatever was out there was listening. I didn't mention it to Rex. Didn't talk out loud at all. Just threw a couple more logs into the stove, sat back down, and kept pretending to watch the movie. But I didn't hit play again. About an hour later, maybe closer to 11, I heard it again. But this time, it wasn't outside. It came from inside the house. Same sound, small, sobbing, like a kid holding in a cry but not doing a great job of it. But now it was coming from the crawl space vent. There's this little metal vent near the back door, right above the floor, and the sound came from right behind it. Low, wet, just one hiccup-like sob. Rex heard it too. His ears shot up and he growled, slow and steady, like a warning. His eyes were locked dead on that vent, and I'd never seen him look that serious unless there was something worth worrying about. I walked over, leaned down. Thought maybe something had gotten under the house. Possum, raccoon, something with a hurt paw. But when I got close, the crying stopped, instantly. Not a fade, not a shuffle or rustle like something scurrying off. Just silence, the kind of silence that feels like it's holding its breath with you. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the slats. Couldn't see anything in the dark behind them. I reached down and latched it shut, flipped the little lock, and stayed crouched there for another moment. Then I stood up and walked back to the chair. I didn't sleep that night. By 2 in the morning, I was still sitting in the recliner. Had my boots on, shirt halfway buttoned, and the old .22 I kept for varmints laying across my lap. I'd let the fire die low just to hear better, and the whole place had that empty, cold quiet that makes every small sound feel like a shout. Rex hadn't left the hallway. He wasn't pacing or barking, just sitting dead still, staring down toward the far end of the house. That's when I heard it again. But this time, it came from the hallway itself. Same sound. A short, choked sob. But the way it echoed down the hall was wrong. The space isn't big. You clap your hands down there, and the sound bounces once, maybe twice. This cry felt like it was coming from all directions at once. Not loud, just wrong. Like the house couldn't figure out where to put it. I stood up slow, lifted the rifle, took 2 steps into the hallway. There's only one door at the end, the guest room. I hadn't been in there for weeks, just a rocker in the corner and a cardboard box of old books from my dad's place. I kept the door shut mostly because I didn't like cleaning it. The crying stopped as soon as I got near the door. I stood there, trying to listen past the thudding in my chest, then turned the handle and pushed it open. The room was still. Window locked from the inside. The rocker in the corner wasn't moving. The box was right where I left it, but the floor was warm. Not just a little warmer than the hallway. I mean warm, like someone had just been standing barefoot right in the center of the room. The boards under my boots had this faint heat, like sun-baked wood on a summer porch, only there hadn't been any sun for hours. I stepped back, closed the door, and didn't say a word. By sunrise, I'd nailed it shut. Next morning, I went out back and crawled under the house. Called Travis, a guy from town who traps nuisance animals on the side. He showed up with gear and walked the whole property. Found nothing, no signs of digging, no loose boards, not even a hair caught on a nail. That guest room stayed nailed shut the rest of the time I lived there. My sister had finally moved out, got herself a little apartment closer to Elkhorn, where her job was. She'd been living with me in the family home ever since our mom passed, but once she was gone, it was just me. I thought I'd enjoy the quiet. I did, for a while. There's a certain peace in being alone, especially out here in the holler. We live in a deep cut of southern West Virginia, right along the edge of the state line. Not much out there. Just thick woods, narrow gravel roads, and a handful of old houses spaced out like they were dropped randomly from the sky. Most folks out here know each other, but we're not the visiting type. Everyone minds their own, and that's how it's always been. The reception is spotty on a good day, and the internet was still DSL when my sister left, but I didn't care. I liked the routine wake up, feed Benny my dog, do some chores, maybe work on a puzzle, or watch a DVD if the power didn't flicker out. I'd grown used to the slow, predictable rhythm of life out here. That year, November came hard and early. I remember Halloween because it was the first night I had to wear gloves to hand out candy to the handful of neighborhood kids that got driven down in pickups. By the next morning, the ground was stiff with frost, and the cold hung around like it meant business. The kind of cold that settles in your bones, even when you're wrapped up indoors. So that night, the one I can't stop thinking about, it started off normal. I fed Benny around 6, heated up some leftover stew, watched a rerun of something dumb. By the time 10 o'clock rolled around, I'd already done my nightly routine, locked the doors, checked the windows, pulled the curtains. You get into those habits when you live out in the woods. They're not even safety things, not really. Just rituals that make you feel like everything's still in your control. Benny was already snoring before I made it to bed. He always curled up right at the foot, like a little space heater. I left the bedroom door cracked just a few inches, not because I was scared or anything, just so I could hear if something happened downstairs. Pipes, mostly. They clank when the temperature drops. Everything was still. You know that kind of still where you can hear the air settle? That brittle silence where every tiny noise sounds bigger than it should? I was drifting off when Benny shot upright. No warning, no bark. Just straight from dead sleep to alert. Ears stiff, eyes locked on the hallway like he saw something I couldn't. I'd prop myself up, whispering his name. Nothing. He didn't even flick his tail. Then I heard it too. A muffled thump. It sounded like someone putting weight onto the porch but trying not to. Like when you test an old board to see if it'll creak. I froze. Benny didn't move. He just stayed locked in place, staring out toward the hall. I reached for my phone. 1 bar of service, maybe half. I typed out a quick message to my cousin Leah, who lived up on Ridge Hollow Road, barely 2 miles away. Just said, "Hey, I think someone's outside." I hit send, failed. I tried again, failed. Meanwhile, the house had gone dead quiet again, until the second sound came. It was louder, more distinct, like someone dragging a boot across the wood grain of the porch, slow and heavy. I didn't have it in me to move right away. My legs felt like they weighed 100 pounds, but I finally crept out of bed and made my way to the bedroom window. I pulled back the curtain just a sliver, peering down at the porch. Light was still on. That same dim yellow bulb casting its usual shadows across the steps and the gravel just beyond. But there was nothing there. No movement, no shape, no shadows that didn't belong. Then Benny made a sound I've only heard once in all the years I've had him. This deep, throaty growl, more vibration than sound. He did it last spring when a bear stumbled into our trash bins and wouldn't leave. That sound made the hair on my arms stand up. I stepped back from the window, opened the closet, and took out my dad's old hunting rifle. I hadn't fired it in years. Didn't even check if it was loaded. I just held it like a lifeline, and that's when the doorknob jiggled. Not hard, not like someone trying to force their way in. It was soft, careful, like a test. Just enough movement to let me know someone was out there, but not enough to make noise if I hadn't been listening for it. I pointed the rifle toward the door, though I knew they weren't inside. Not yet. Benny was beside me again, low to the ground now, every muscle tight, and then I heard the tapping from the kitchen. It started slow, metal on glass. 1 tap. Pause. Another. I didn't run. I didn't yell. I don't think I could have if I wanted to. I crept out of the bedroom, hugging the hallway wall. I switched off the upstairs light and crouched low, inching my way toward the stairs. The tapping stopped, then started again, just as slow, steady, unhurried. When I reached the top of the stairs, I peeked down. The living room looked empty. Still, the porch light outside spilled faintly across the far wall. Then the footsteps started, inside, not rushed, not panicked, just walking. Steady steps moving across the old wood floor. I pressed my back to the wall so hard it felt like I'd melt into it. My whole body tensed. The steps moved from the front door across the living room, then stopped. At the foot of the stairs. I didn't breathe, didn't blink, didn't move a single inch. After what felt like forever, I leaned forward just enough to see. There was someone standing at the bottom of the staircase. Just enough of their head was visible to make it clear. Someone was there, not crouching, just standing still, watching. Their hair was greasy and long, a dull brown mess that looked stuck to their scalp. I couldn't see their face, just that they weren't moving, not an inch. I shouted, don't even know what I said, something like, "Hey," or "I've got a gun." Didn't matter. They didn't move. Then I heard my name, soft, from behind me. I spun around so fast, I almost lost my grip on the rifle. The hallway was empty. My bedroom door still open, nothing but shadow inside. I turned back toward the stairs. Empty, the figure was gone. Benny was pacing now, low and stiff, still growling. He kept looking toward the stairs, then toward the hallway behind us, like he didn't know which direction to guard. I backed into the bedroom, slammed the door shut, locked it, and shoved the dresser in front of it. I didn't sleep. Not 1 second. I sat with my back against the far wall, the rifle across my knees, and stared at that door until morning. When the sun finally broke through the window, I waited another full hour before I moved. I went downstairs slow, every board underfoot sounding like thunder. But everything was normal. Door still locked, windows shut, curtains untouched. No footprints on the porch, no scratches on the glass, no broken locks, like it hadn't happened. Except one thing. I walked to the kitchen window where I'd heard the tapping. There was something sitting on the sill outside. A bird. Small. Probably a sparrow. Neck twisted. Still warm when I picked it up with a rag. I buried it out back just behind the shed. That winter, I installed cameras. Motion lights. Reinforced the doors. Added new locks. I stayed in that house 2 more years. Nothing else ever happened. My parents had to go out of town for a funeral. Some cousin of my dad's in a place called Cherrystone, 2 towns over. They left early that Friday morning, all dressed in black and rushing around, arguing about directions like they always did. Mom didn't want me missing school or sitting through a long weekend of family drama, so I stayed home. Honestly, I didn't mind. I had homework, leftover food, and the rare chance to have the house all to myself. Our house sits right on the edge of Mercer Hollow, where the pavement starts breaking up into gravel and the woods creep close on both sides. The house itself is old, older than my parents' marriage, and it shows it. Every board has a groan, every hinge sighs, and if you stand still long enough, it feels like the whole place is listening back. It was a cold night for early November. I microwaved a bowl of leftover chili, wrapped myself in the thick patchwork quilt that smells faintly of cedar, and sat at the kitchen table, trying to care about my history essay. My laptop screen was the only light in the room, a pale little glow surrounded by darkness. The house made its usual noises: creaks, the faint pop of the baseboards, the low hum of the heater. Everything is ordinary. Then the power went out. No warning, no flicker, just complete darkness and silence. I sat there for a second, blinking like an idiot, waiting for it to come back. Sometimes storms knock it out, but that night was calm. No wind, no thunder, no rain, just dead quiet. I muttered a few choice words, got up, and fumbled for my flashlight in the kitchen drawer, found it between some old takeout menus and a roll of duct tape. The beam cut through the dark in a narrow cone, dust floating through it. The fridge had gone silent, and the air felt colder already. I checked the fuse box. Nothing had tripped. Looked out the front window, hoping maybe the neighbors still had power. No lights anywhere. Not a single one. Okay, I thought. Whole ridge must be out. Wouldn't be the first time. Still, it bothered me how sudden it had gone. Usually, there's some kind of warning. A flicker, a sound, something. This felt intentional. I lit a couple candles, set one on the counter, and propped the flashlight so it bounced light off the ceiling. The kitchen looked washed out and strange, all long shadows and flickering gold light. I tried to shake the uneasy feeling creeping up the back of my neck. Then I heard it. A sound. Tap. At first, I thought it was just the screen door rattling. That thing never sits right, and the wind catches it easily. But there wasn't any wind. I held still, listening. It wasn't random. It had rhythm. Slow. Almost hesitant, like someone testing whether I'd respond. I froze. The sound was coming from the back door. Now, the back porch light doesn't reach the steps, and there's no window in the door itself, just the narrow kitchen window beside it. I didn't move for a full minute, just listening. The tapping stopped. I tried to convince myself it was a branch, or maybe a raccoon. That's what it had to be. But the moment I reached out and switched off the flashlight to save the battery, 3 knocks echoed through the dark. Not tapping this time. Knocks. Hard, clear, deliberate. I couldn't move. My brain jumped straight to my parents, but they would have come through the front, not the back. They would have called out. They definitely wouldn't knock like that. I crawled into the hallway holding the flashlight, but not daring to turn it on. The house felt different in the dark, bigger somehow, empty but heavy. I crept to the front window and peeked through the curtains. The driveway was empty. The road beyond it was black. No headlights, no motion. I pulled out my phone. No service. Of course. I sat there, crouched by the window, my pulse thudding in my throat. I listened for another knock. Nothing. Just that awful, loaded quiet. Then I heard it again, but not from the door. From the side of the house. A soft brushing sound, like fabric sliding along the wood siding. A second later, the motion light on the shed blinked on. My stomach dropped. That light only goes off when something moves between the shed and the house. 15 feet of open yard. I didn't look. I couldn't. I just crouched there, gripping the flashlight, breathing shallow. The light stayed on for a few seconds, then went out. Then came the tapping again. This time at the living room window, the one that faces the woods. I could picture it perfectly. The shape just beyond the glass, hand lifting, pausing, pressing the tip of a finger to the window. I thought about running. But where? Out into the dark woods with no light, no phone signal, and who knows what out there. Staying inside felt just as bad. I waited until the tapping stopped. Then, moving as quietly as I could, I crawled to my bedroom. That room faces the front, closer to the road. I cracked the window open just an inch and listened. Nothing. Then leaves crunching. Slow, steady steps moving from the back toward the front. I waited until the footsteps were just beneath the window, then pushed it open and slipped out. The cold hit like a slap. My bare feet sank into the frost, and the air burned my lungs as I ran. I crossed the yard in a few strides and dove into the ditch across the road, pressing myself flat against the frozen ground. The grass scratched my face, and I could feel every heartbeat in my ribs. From there, I watched. For a long time, nothing moved. Then I saw him. A man, tall, wearing a hooded jacket. He came around from the side of the house and stopped by the front door. He didn't knock, didn't try the handle, just stood there. He turned his head slowly and looked toward the road, toward me. I ducked down so fast my chin hit the ground. My whole body shook, not from cold anymore, but pure adrenaline. I waited, expecting him to start walking toward me, but he didn't. He just turned and went back the way he came. The shed light flicked on again. I stayed there for what felt like forever, shivering, trying not to make a sound, watching the light blink off again. When I finally saw headlights climbing the hill, it felt like salvation. My neighbor Gary's old pickup. He worked the night shift at the mill and always came home around that time. I jumped up, waving both arms like a lunatic. He hit the brakes, rolled down his window, and I ran up, blurting out some jumble of words that barely made sense. He must have seen the look on my face because he didn't ask questions, just told me to get in. We drove straight to his place, and he called the sheriff from his landline. When the deputies arrived, they searched the house and yard. Nothing, no one, just footprints, all around the house, under every window, across the porch, leading into the woods, not a single one coming back out. They said it was probably a trespasser, maybe a hunter lost in the dark. But hunters don't knock on doors, and they sure don't stand and watch from the yard. I moved out a year later for college, but even now, when I visit home, I can't stay there alone. Dad was out on a coal haul again, overnight route. He'd taken that shift more often by then, said it paid a little better and the roads were quieter. And he wasn't wrong about that. Once the sun dipped past the trees out here, it was just us and whatever the dark let in. The house sat low, tucked in near a long-forgotten road that probably hadn't been maintained since the 70s. Trees crowded the place on all sides, half of them dead or leaning in, just a little too close. It was early November and cold enough to bite through your jeans. That time of year when you don't notice the cold creeping in until your knuckles are stiff and your breath's fogging indoors. We didn't have central heat or anything fancy, just the wood stove in the living room, cast iron, heavy as hell, with a door that squealed when you opened it. We fed it all day and kept it burning through the night to stop the cold from settling into the walls. That night, it was already glowing by 6. I'd just finished heating up one of those sad microwave meatloaf dinners and was tucked in on the couch with a thick blanket stretched across my legs. Laptop on the coffee table, movie playing in the background, something dumb and loud. I wasn't really watching, just noise to keep the silence company. Then the power blinked, once, then again, gone. I just stared at the screen for a second while it faded to black, waiting like maybe it would come back if I held still. It didn't. Not unusual out there, really. The power cut out at least a few times each winter. Wind pulled lines down, trees leaned into the wrong places. We were low priority for the grid, so nobody rushed to fix things. I got up, found one of the old kerosene lamps we kept on the shelf in the kitchen, lit it without even thinking twice. The smell was sharp and oily but comforting in a weird way. Meant we still had a little control over the night. My phone had no bars inside. It never did. So I pulled on my jacket and stepped out onto the front porch to text Dad. Just a quick, "Power's out." "Everything's fine." I leaned against the railing while it tried to send, squinting out at the tree line. That's when I noticed the smell. It hit like something soggy and metallic had been left too long in the cold, like wet fur mixed with rusted nails. It wasn't strong enough to make me gag or anything, but it stopped me in my tracks. I looked around, expecting to see maybe a dead animal in the ditch or something. But there was nothing. No breeze. No insects. Not even the usual groan of trees shifting in the wind. Just a frozen stillness that settled over everything. And then I saw the light. Out past the property line, deep in the trees, there was this faint orange glow. Not like firelight, no flickering or sparks. It was steady, soft, but definitely moving. At first, I thought maybe one of the kids up the hill was riding a four-wheeler with bad headlights, or maybe an old hunting cabin finally had someone staying in it again. But the more I looked, the less sense it made. The glow wasn't coming from a single point. It looked stretched, like someone had strung lanterns low through the woods and was swaying them back and forth in slow motion. But there was no wind, no wires, nothing holding them. Just light drifting parallel to the tree line, never quite getting closer. Eventually, my message sent. The bar popped back up for half a second, then disappeared again. I backed into the house without taking my eyes off the woods, latched the door, and checked the windows one by one. Everything was shut. Still, something in my chest was tight, like I'd heard a noise I couldn't place, or smelled something I wasn't supposed to smell. I turned off the lamp to save the fuel and sat down on the floor by the front window, pulling the blanket tight around my shoulders. From there, I could still see the glow, still drifting, still moving with a rhythm I couldn't quite understand. It kept on for maybe 30 minutes. Then it faded, like someone dimming a light behind layers of fog. That should have been the end of it. Then I heard the sound of boots on the back porch, not stomping or running, just a slow, deliberate step. 2 steps, a pause, then one more. I didn't even breathe. There wasn't a gun in the house. Dad kept his locked in his truck, and the truck was miles away with him. Closest thing I had was a chipped aluminum bat we used to chase off raccoons and a kindling hatchet that was more rust than blade. I grabbed the bat, crouched low behind the couch, and listened. No knock, no door handle rattling, just stillness. I stayed there, hunched, for what felt like forever. Then, on all fours, I crawled to the back window and lifted the curtain just an inch. Nothing. The porch was empty, but that didn't sit right. That smell was still in the air, fainter but there, and something told me not to trust what I was seeing. I locked the back door, shoved a wooden chair under the knob, and killed every light I hadn't already turned off. Then I waited, and then it came again, a knock at the front door. 1 knock, then 3 more. I held my breath. Then again, 1, pause, 3, and a voice. It was soft, almost too soft, like someone leaning close to a door but not quite raising their voice. A woman, maybe, or someone trying to sound like one. There was something off about it, not robotic, not whispery, just flat. Die is flat. No real emotion behind the words, like she was reading off a line she'd memorized but didn't understand. "Can you let me in? It's cold." I didn't move. "Please," she said. "I'm freezing." Then another knock, and silence. I waited. 5 minutes, 10, nothing. No steps, no retreating rustle through the leaves, just the fire crackling behind me and that slow burning panic that never fully took over but wouldn't go away. Eventually, I crept to the door, stood on my toes, and peeked through the peephole. Nobody was there. I waited another 20 minutes, just in case. Then, slowly, I unlocked the door and opened it just a crack. The porch was empty, the yard beyond it still. But something was off. Our doormat, a cheap green thing with a fading leaf print, was flipped over. I didn't remember hearing it move. Underneath, someone had drawn in the dirt. 3 overlapping circles, a line running through them, right down the middle. Not just traced, etched in, like someone had taken time to do it properly. My throat went dry. I shut the door, locked it again, took the fire poker from beside the stove and dragged it with me as I pulled the hallway dresser across the door frame. It scraped the floor, loud and ugly, but I didn't care. That night I sat on the floor with a blanket around my shoulders, bat in my lap, and my back to the wall so I could see both the front and back doors at once. The fire burned low, throwing weird shadows, but I didn't add more wood. I just watched and waited for daylight. When Dad finally pulled up around 6 in the morning, I was still there. Eyes bloodshot, hands stiff. He opened the door like he already knew something had happened. I told him everything. He didn't crack a joke. Didn't tell me I was tired or paranoid. Just stepped out to the porch, looked down at the dirt, and went real quiet. Then he said, "If you ever hear that knock again, 1 then 3, don't open anything, not even a window." He spent the next half hour scrubbing the porch clean. Then he poured a line of salt along the door frame and the edges of the house, like he was trying to seal something out. Or in. I didn't ask what he thought it was. Honestly, I didn't want the answer. Since then, I've never stayed in that house alone. My cousin Lacey had just gotten married that October. The leaves had barely finished falling when she called to ask if I'd house sit for a week. She and her new husband Mark were heading to Gatlinburg for their honeymoon, and they didn't want to leave the cabin empty. I'd only seen the place once before during a family gathering years ago, just long enough to remember how remote it was. It sat way up in the hills near a place called Bent Hollow. Lacey gave me a quick rundown before they left. The heater was temperamental, and the power sometimes cut out during storms. There were definitely mice. She'd left traps, but told me to bring more just in case. I loaded up my car with some food, extra blankets, and a couple books, thinking it would be a quiet, uneventful week. The first few days passed like I expected. I worked remotely during the day and read at night. No cell service, but there was a small weather radio I used to check for updates. The wind was almost constant, and every now and then it would gust hard enough to make the walls pop or the windows rattle. At first I jumped every time it happened, but you get used to it. Mostly, I avoided the cellar. I didn't need anything down there, and even walking past that door made me feel aware. I'd try not to look at it too long. It wasn't anything dramatic, just that creeping discomfort you get when something's off and your brain won't stop noticing. On the 4th night, the wind really picked up. It was one of those steady, restless kinds that sounded like it was trying to push the cabin off the ridge. I was curled up on the couch with a blanket reading when the lights started to flicker. Just quick little pulses at first, like they were struggling to stay on. Then they died completely. No warning, no final surge, just gone. I sat there for a second, waiting to see if they'd come back on. Nothing. Total darkness, except for the dim outlines outside the window. The trees silhouetted in pale moonlight through the frost. I checked my phone out of habit. No signal, no Wi-Fi. Of course. I lit a couple candles, then dug around until I found the big flashlight I'd brought. The silence hit differently when the lights were gone. No hum from the fridge. No heater ticking. Just the wind outside and the soft creak of the cabin's bones adjusting. I'd just put some soup on the wood stove when I heard it. 2 thumps, slow and heavy, right above me. The loft. At first, I just froze. Tried to decide if I'd actually heard it. Then it came again, a little louder. Definitely footsteps. I hadn't touched the loft since I arrived. The mattress was up there, but the stairs were steep and narrow and I didn't need the space. I kept telling myself it had to be something else. Maybe a branch hit the roof or a squirrel had gotten in. But something about the sound wasn't right. It was too slow, too heavy. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and pointed my flashlight up. The beam cut across the railing, the mattress, the sloped ceiling. Nothing moved, nothing there. I waited, held my breath for a second longer. Silence. I went back to the stove, a little shaken but trying to be rational. 10 minutes later, I was still watching the soup when I heard a completely different sound. Not above me, behind me. Bare feet, on linoleum, stepping slowly. The kind of sound you know instantly. Wet and soft. Just 3 or 4 steps. I spun around so fast I knocked the pot clean off the stove. Soup splattered everywhere. But the kitchen? Empty, completely still. The back door was locked, no windows were open, nothing was moved. But I stood there in the candlelight, flashlight shaking slightly in my hand, scanning the room. Every corner, every shadow. My scalp prickled, and my heartbeat had kicked up hard, but I didn't move. Eventually, I convinced myself that it was all in my head. Isolation makes everything sound louder. I repeated that to myself like a mantra. That night, I stayed on the couch again, kept the flashlight under the blanket with me, pointed toward the kitchen. The next morning felt calmer. Still no power, but it didn't matter. The sun came out and made everything feel normal enough. I made coffee on the wood stove and even laughed at myself a bit. By noon, I decided to face the loft, just to prove it was fine. I went up with the flashlight. Everything was exactly as it should be. Mattress untouched. No footprints. No weird smells. I stayed up there a full 5 minutes just to drive the point home. Nothing. That afternoon, though, I opened the root cellar door. I wasn't going down, just needed to see if there were more candles in the pantry shelf right above it. But when I pulled the door open, I froze. There were footprints on the stairs. Muddy, small, bare. They led down the steps, not up, and they looked fresh. I hadn't touched the cellar, not once, and it had rained lightly the day before. These weren't old tracks. The mud was still damp in places, and you could see the shape of each toe. I stood there a while, flashlight aimed down into the pitch black. My stomach twisted a little. I called out once. Just, hello, not loud, not brave. My voice just disappeared. The sound didn't bounce back. It felt like it got sucked into the floor. I shut the door, locked it, then dragged the kitchen table in front of it. It wasn't light, but I didn't care. I didn't want that door opening again. That night, I lit every candle I had. Didn't even try to sleep right away. I sat on the couch with a blanket wrapped around me, flashlight on, just listening. Every creak of the walls, every gust of wind outside felt exaggerated, like the house was testing me. Sometime around 1 in the morning, I woke up. The sound of running water, faint but steady. No one else was there. Nothing in that house made noise unless you turned it on yourself. It was coming from the bathroom, which, of course, sat right next to the cellar door. I got up slowly, flashlight in one hand, heart thumping hard enough that I could feel it in my ears. The bathroom door was cracked open just a little, and I could hear the trickling water behind it. When I pushed it open, the faucet was turned all the way on, full blast. Water spraying out like someone had just been there. The mirror above the sink was fogged, which made no sense. There was no heat in the house. And on the mirror, right in the middle of the condensation, were 3 long vertical lines, scraped clear like someone had drawn them with a fingertip or nails. I turned off the water. Didn't say anything. Just stood there staring at those lines while my chest tightened and the flashlight flickered once. Behind me, the cellar door creaked again. Just a little. Not opening. Just enough to let me know it was there. That was the last straw. I packed everything in silence. Didn't bother folding. Didn't bother turning out the candles. I just got my bag, shoved everything in, and wrote a quick note for Lacey saying something came up and I had to leave early. My roommate Noah had headed home to New Hampshire for Thanksgiving break. I didn't feel like making the trip back to Pennsylvania too much hassle for 4 days and a lukewarm family dinner. So I stayed back in our rental cabin just outside a small town called Elmsford. The place sat right at the edge of the woods, down a cracked gravel road barely wide enough for 2 cars to squeeze past each other. The place had clearly seen better decades, but we got a good deal because, as our landlord casually mentioned, the last tenant left unexpectedly. He said it like someone giving directions to a pothole. Just a heads up, nothing to worry about. We didn't ask questions. Rent was cheap, utilities worked. We figured it was probably a breakup or a transfer or something. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around, the cold had settled in for good. That brittle kind of cold that gets into your teeth. I had 2 space heaters going, one in the living room and one upstairs, plus the stove running with a pot of chili. That cabin didn't retain heat worth anything. I'd thrown on 2 sweatshirts and some thick socks and curled up on the couch with a mug of something hot and this dusty old book I'd found in the loft. It was local history stuff, ghost towns, old mining operations, legends about whole settlements that vanished into the trees. The kind of thing that feels dramatic until you look around and realize there really are miles of unbroken woods out there, swallowing up whatever doesn't hold on tight. I was halfway through a section about a defunct railroad town when I heard footsteps on the gravel outside. At first, I figured it was a deer. We'd had a few wander through the yard before, usually just lumbering through, chewing on wet leaves, minding their business. But these steps were different, slower, more deliberate. I listened for the rhythm. It didn't sound like hooves. Could have been Mr. Reinhold, I thought. He was our closest neighbor, a retired Army guy who lived about 100 yards down the road. Sometimes he'd stop by with extra firewood or updates on what the township was screwing up this time. But when I stepped out onto the porch, there was nothing. No wind. No movement in the trees. Just stillness. I stood there for a minute, scanning the tree line and the gravel road, but it was like the world had gone on pause. I went back inside, shut the door, didn't think much of it. But maybe 15 minutes later I heard it again. Footsteps. Closer this time, crunching slowly over gravel like someone was taking their time. Not loud, but intentional. That was the part that got me. There's a kind of quiet you get used to in places like that, and anything that breaks it stands out. These steps weren't casual. They had a direction. I opened the front door again. Nothing. This time, I flicked on the porch light. Scanned everything. The fire pit, the edge of the woods, even under the porch. Still no one. Still no movement. But now I had that tight feeling behind my ribs, like my body knew something I didn't. I locked the door, double-checked the windows in the kitchen. The latch on one of them had come loose a few weeks back, so I made sure it was set. Then I went upstairs to grab my phone, thinking maybe Noah had texted or something. No messages, no notifications. But the charger, this part sticks with me. The charger was unplugged and lying on the floor. The cord was still stretched toward the outlet like it had been yanked or knocked loose. And I know for a fact I had plugged it in. I remember lining up the cable and seeing the screen light up before I went back down. I'm not the type to forget stuff like that. I stared at it for a second, just standing there with my phone in one hand and the cord in the other. Then the back door creaked. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. Just this low, dragging groan of wood against wood. That door didn't just open. It stuck. Badly. You had to put your shoulder into it to get it to budge. I remember struggling with it the day we moved in, practically bracing my foot against the floor to force it open. So when I heard it creak, slowly and steadily, my body went cold. I moved to the top of the stairs and peered down. The mudroom door was open, just gently swinging inward. I didn't say anything, didn't move. Then something knocked over the broom in the mudroom. It hit the ground with a dull plastic thump, not a crash, like it had been bumped by someone squeezing past it. I backed up a step, heart hammering now. Reached for the fireplace poker leaning by the chimney-heavy cast iron, solid in my hand. I crept down the stairs, quiet as I could, trying not to let the boards creak under me. From where I stood in the hallway, I could just barely see into the mudroom. The broom was on the floor. The door was fully open now. I stayed completely still, listening. One sound, just one like the heel of a boot pressing into old wood. A slow, deliberate step. And then silence. I slipped into the kitchen, turned off the lights one by one. It wasn't bravery. It was instinct. I knew that house. Every floorboard, every blind spot. If someone was in there, I didn't want to give them the upper hand. I crouched behind the kitchen counter and waited. The silence dragged. I could feel my thighs starting to cramp, but I didn't move. Then the door creaked again, closing this time, slow and steady, like someone easing it shut without making noise. I didn't move until my knees felt like they were going to give out. Then I stood, still gripping the poker, and checked every room. The mudroom was empty. No one behind the water heater, no signs of forced entry. But the broom was on the floor, and the rug by the door had been pushed sideways, like someone's boot had caught it. I turned on every light in that house. Didn't sleep, didn't even sit down. When the sun came up, I finally stepped outside, walked around to the back door and found them boot prints in the frost. Faint, but there. They led from the tree line straight to the mudroom door, then turned around and disappeared back into the woods. Nothing near the front, nothing by the gravel road. Later that day, I drove into town and bought new locks. Not just better ones, extra ones. Bolts, chains, everything. A week passed. Noah came back. He didn't notice anything right away, and I didn't tell him. I figured there was no point in freaking him out if whoever it was had already left. But then one morning, he asked me something weird. He said, "Hey, did you go in my room while I was gone?" I told him no, of course not. He said he'd left his clock radio on the windowsill, and now it was on the floor across the room, turned around, facing the wall. We stared at each other for a second. Neither of us said what we were thinking. We didn't need to. We both knew we weren't renewing the lease. By spring, we were in a third-floor apartment near campus. Loud neighbors, flickering hallway lights, and not a single tree in sight. I never told Noah about the charger, or the boot prints, or that single step on the mudroom floor. But every year, right around Thanksgiving, I remember it. The broom, the silence, that creaking door, and I still keep the poker under my bed, just in case.